Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please welcome Pete Peterson.
There are so many reasons I'm thrilled to have President Bill Clinton with us today. I don't think anyone is more qualified than he to discuss the urgency of our fiscal challenges, what to do about them, and how they relate to the future of American prosperity and our global stature. When he took office in 1993, President Clinton knew that America's economic future could be determined in large part by our ability to get our fiscal house in order. At the time, the country was emerging from an economic recession and had gone through a long period of budget deficits. Does that sound familiar to anyone? He led a bipartisan effort that bridged varying ideologies and put in place tough spending restraints, spending caps, pay-go rules, and tax increases and the like, which led to a period of major growth in the economy and even budget surpluses. I am very interested to hear how he might apply his political and leadership magic to today's polarized and paralyzed environment. Let me also say that if I were to name the president whose post-presidency I most admire, I could not imagine one that equals or certainly surpasses President Clinton's. The Clinton Foundation has brought together organizations and contributors that across sectors and the globe to develop a stunning $63 billion to address urgent needs, including HIV/AIDS, climate change, and economic development. Having been privileged to attend the last two Clinton Foundation annual meetings, I can attest that President Clinton's knowledge of and passion for his wide range of philanthropic areas needs to be seen, to be believed. It's enough to encourage me to reconsider the amendment that restricts the presidency to 2 terms. Although, if Bill Clinton were restricted to the presidency, I fear we'd be losing some of his philanthropic talents. And who better, next month, the Clinton Global Initiative will launch a CGI America, which will focus on strengthening the American economy, creating jobs, and promoting investment. I'm looking forward to being there and getting a preview today of his thoughts on economic growth and fiscal sustainability. Mr. President, my friend, the warmest of welcomes. And who better to interview you than Gwen Ifill? As the host and managing editor of Washington Week, Gwen is one of the most respected voices in American journalism. She's also a senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour and has moderated 2 of the most recent vice presidential debates. Gwen is the best-selling author of The Breakthrough: Politics and Race in the Age of Obama. She has been honored numerous times for her outstanding work, which includes interviewing a variety of national leaders. Gwen, we are delighted to have you here. I now introduce the President and Gwen Ifill.
The president just said to me, who better to interview him than someone who stalked him for 8 years? Actually, what he said was gave him hell for 8 years, but I decided to make it nicer. I am thrilled to be here today to talk about an important topic, and in the interest and in the spirit of the conversation that the Peterson Foundation has been having so far, I want to start by talking to you in a bipartisan manner. Tim Pawlenty, who just announced he's running for president, said last week that he feels that Americans are not looking this in the eye, that they need to slash budgets without regard to sacred cows. Is that even possible?
Yeah, I think it is, but I think that it needs to make sense. I mean, let's not forget the terrible double bind America is in right now is that in classic economic terms, this is the worst time to cut deficits. That's the relentless stream of columns Paul Krugman writes in the New York Times every day. He's right about that. There's a chance that if there is zero demand for private capital, it's not quite that low, but interest rates are virtually zero, and there's so little activity in the private sector. If you cut public investment at the same time, that actually you'll lose more revenues in declining economic activity and declining tax revenues than you get from the spending cuts. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the United Kingdom on that, because the early results are not particularly encouraging. The theory of the Cameron budget is the same theory and the whole theory that the European Central Bank seems to be driving, is that even though interest rates are functionally zero, so the benefit you normally get from reducing the debt is to ease interest rates and you get a big increase in investment, they think there's some sort of confidence premium in doing it right now when things are fairly flat. What I thought the genius of the Bowles-Simpson report was that they recommended big structural long-term changes and asked that we not start until next year when the recovery was plainly underway. And the work that Pete Peterson and Michael and the whole group in the Peterson Foundation have done is based on dealing with this over the long run. So my view is, if you deal with it over the long run and tell the American people the truth, I think that we can work through this. Now, I know some people will say that the election in New York yesterday for Congress proves that that's not true, but I just completely disagree with that. I mean, the Republicans ran to the left of the Democrats on Medicare in the last election. They excoriated us for all these savings that are now embedded in Congressman Ryan's budget. And they claim we cut Medicare when what the Democrats essentially did was to cut the reimbursement rate for Medicare Advantage and put the money into lengthening the life of the Medicare Trust Fund and closing the donut hole in the drug program, which, according to Kathleen Sebelius' report in the morning paper, is saving money because we're also requiring a discount on drugs bought in volume, which we should do, I think.
But do you think that the race in New York was a referendum on this issue, or was it about something else? It's sometimes easy to overinterpret.
No, it was about Medicare. But the only point I'm trying to make is, it was an inevitable consequence of the fact that the Republicans ran to the left of the Democrats. They attacked the Democrats for cutting Medicare. It was not a true charge. And the Democrats, for a reason I will never understand, decided to keep what they had actually done a secret so that the attack would certainly work. Go figure. And so it happened. But all I'm saying is you shouldn't draw the conclusion that the New York race means that nobody can do anything to slow the rate of Medicare cost. I just don't agree with that. I think that what you should draw the conclusion that the people made a judgment that the proposal in the Republican budget is not the right one. I agree with that. But I'm afraid that the Democrats will draw the conclusion that because Congressman Ryan's proposal, I think, is not the best one, that we shouldn't do anything, and I completely disagree with that. I think there are lots of things you can do to bring down Medicare costs. When I was president, we passed a Medicare reform bill, bipartisan, and it saved 50% more than it was estimated to save in the first 2 years, so much so that the Congress went back and actually increased some of the reimbursement rates, and still over a 10-year period, and keep in mind, this is more than a decade ago, It saved 23% more than the Congressional Budget Office said it would, more than $700 billion over a decade.
Mr. President, how
So you can
different,
do this.
how different are things now than more than a decade ago when you faced $300 billion in deficits when you came in office, and when you left there were surpluses as far as the eye can see?
Well, the deficit problem is worse because, let's go back to the bidding. This whole thing, we had never run permanent structural deficits of any size before 1981, when the American people bought the argument in the '80 election that the government was the source of all evil and there was no such thing as a good tax, no such thing as a bad tax cut. That was the beginning of America's involvement with structural deficits. The deficit, the debt of the country was quadrupled between 1981 and 1993. Then we had 4 surplus budgets, paid about $600 billion down on the debt. And my last budget obviously was mostly President Bush's first year. We were in a recession. He proposed tax cuts, but continued to propose them, so we doubled the debt again in the next 8 years. And then we had the financial meltdown, which devastated the revenue stream of the government. So this is a more severe problem. And it's more severe because I became president at the tail end of a traditional business cycle recession. And when we had clearly high real interest rates because of the debt. This recession was caused by a financial meltdown, and the recovery has been slow even with 0 interest rates. It's more like what Japan went through after their collapse. These financial real estate collapses normally take longer to get out of than traditional business cycle recessions, so it's tougher now.
Democrats can oversell the idea that in the years when you were president, everything was rosy, and now that the Republicans have been in charge for 8 years and the Democrats are just taking it over, they should be able to fix it. Just give it back to the Democrats. They're overselling that?
Well, I think that they're fundamentally right that the approach they took was better, but the Americans, if you look at the last 30 years, we only get hired when things are messed up. And so people want to feel fixed. And in 1994, we lost the Congress because people didn't feel fixed yet, and because we were vulnerable to claims that we were proto-socialist, all that stuff they said this time. And then in 2010, people didn't feel fixed yet. But in fact, a lot of good things were going on underneath the surface, including a return of America to real prominence in manufacturing and the race for clean energy technology. And I hope those 2 things will not be reversed in whatever bipartisan resolution is worked out. I still believe that essentially the same dynamics will take hold and that we'll have a bipartisan resolution, both because of the work that Vice President Biden and the Gang of 6, now 5, is doing, and because they all want to get reelected. And people will want to see some progress on this.